Good morning, everybody. And thank you for that kind introduction. And also, thank you for organizing this special day where we get to take a moment to think big about data. And thanks to everyone for being here today. So your commitment to data-driven decision-making is already paying off, and it's paying huge dividends for governments across the country. I was appointed by the 109th mayor of New York City, which is another way of saying you can be forgiven for thinking that city government and old-fashioned do go together. But I am here to tell a little bit of a different story this morning. The de Blasio administration is data-driven. It is one of the things that the mayor asked of me when he appointed me to this position. Everything we have done and everything we do begins and ends with data. From adding pre-kindergarten, an entire new grade, to the largest public school system in the nation, and to rolling out, as many have probably seen recently, a sweeping Green New Deal that has set the largest city in the nation to being carbon neutral by 2050. So today, I'm going to talk just about 3 initiatives where we're using data, but there are plenty more examples, but we just wanted to show you how we're using data at the core of what we do. And I'm going to try to do just a few slides, so bear with me. All right, that's a nice picture, isn't it? When I first looked at it, I didn't know what it was, but I'll explain what it is. So I'm going to begin with one of my areas of responsibility, and that is rats. Yes, you heard me, rats. When I got to City Hall, they gave me really all the most interesting jobs to do, like rats. So ever since there have been cities have struggled how to deal with rats. And the bad news is, despite our best efforts to get rid of them, rats are really, really good at thriving where humans live. New York City has been fighting rats by doing inspections and writing tickets to property owners who have rat problems. But the problem kept getting worse. So one day I was sitting in my office and the mayor came in. He said, there must be something we can do about rats. And I thought to myself, I'm sure every mayor has gone to a deputy mayor and said, there must be something we can do about rats. And I said, oh Lord, what am I going to do? So the good news, because I am very data-oriented from my background, is we had decades of data about inspections. And that data told us where we could typically find where rats could burrow and create homes, and where they could get food, eat garbage. So for any of you who have not seen Pizza Rat, on the internet, don't Google it now, but Google it later, because you'll really see the struggles that we have. So our solution was simple in conception: destroy their homes and cut off their food supply, and hopefully they would go away. That meant focusing on parks and other public housing development and other areas which provide ample areas of dirt where rats burrow to build their homes. And on our public schools, where 1.2 million students and teachers eat breakfast, lunch, snacks, after-school programs, weekend programs, trash everywhere, food festival for rats. So the one good thing we also knew, looking at data, we knew the geographical areas that had the most rats. So let me just spend a minute telling you why that's important. So in the past, the city has tried to solve the rat problem by looking at it citywide. So I said, perhaps let's take a little different approach, and let's use our data that we have to figure out the 3 most areas that have the highest level of rats, and figure out if we can throw everything at them and just look at these 3 areas. We could figure out what works, what doesn't work, what we need to change. And so that is the approach we did. So we looked at 3 areas, which are the East Village and the Lower East Side of Manhattan, the Bedford-Stuyvesant and Bushwick sections of Brooklyn, and the Grand Concourse in the Bronx. So we got to work destroying all things that make life easy for rats in those areas. But how do we know if we're being successful? So we needed to collect data once a month from the same places, but we had too much ground to cover, even when limiting to these 3 geographical areas. But once again, data saved the day. We called in our statisticians from our Office of Management and Budget to devise representative sample inspection zones from each of our larger geographical areas. And that is where we focus our inspections. So if we look at the screen, this is the Bedford-Stuyvesant and Bushwick area divided into 6 areas by color. Inspectors cover 1 color each month. And the result of using all this data was a revolution. For the first time in history, New York City could determine exactly what we needed to do to get rid of rats and where to do it to maximize the effect. And let us be clear, we did not do these inspections or break down or do this micro-looking at data to punish anyone in an agency that we felt weren't getting the results that we wanted. We actually used the data to praise those agencies that we were seeing success, but also to lift up those who we felt needed a little additional support. So we just used data to solve problems as quickly and as effectively as we could. And if we look at just this one example, here's a chart of borough counts from one of the areas that we review monthly. And so you can see that we've had a drastic decline in just since 2017 by focusing on these, really pinpointing these areas. But we use data like this to ask questions to devise new strategies. So what were the results? Since we started in 2017, rat complaints from New Yorkers fell 7%. Now you might not say, wow, 7%, but let's think about it. Usually the complaints go up every year. So a 7% decline, this was the biggest decline we saw in more than a decade. The appearance of rat burrows in public housing projects plunged 70%. Rat burrows in parks declined by more than 40%. And our schools are seeing declines in rat activity by 70%. So it has been a success. We are looking now to expand it to a few more zones so that we can probably go zone by zone to hit the most desperate areas in the city that need our help. So let me talk about everyone's second favorite topic after rodents, and that would be taxes, which also fall under my purview. So approximately one tax dollar out of every two in New York City comes from our property tax system. And figuring out who needs to pay property taxes and how much has always been a challenge, especially in a city with over 1 million properties that we need to track. How can we increase our quality control and accuracy while also ensuring New Yorkers pay their fair share of their taxes? The city's property tax experts at the Department of Finance, which I know there are some people here today, were working off data sent to them by a small handful of agencies like the Department of Buildings and the Department of City Planning. But this year, the property tax experts widened their net and went agency to agency and asked for more data, better data, and data in a single file format, no more PDFs. Data entry does not expedite anything. So 9 agencies with valuable data are now participating, including the Parks Department and the Department of Transportation. We are also developing automatic data feeds that go directly to the property tax experts at the Department of Finance. So let me just give you one example of how this project is literally paying off so far. So the city can collect taxes on buildings that are in the middle of construction. So if a building is 30% complete, we can tax it at 30% of its value. If a building is 100% complete, obviously we tax it at 100% of its value. What has always been challenging is knowing where the buildings are in the different stages of construction. And with all the new construction happening in New York, it could take months or sometimes even years to find out, until now. So I'm happy to say that we've closed that gap using a few new data sets. We collect one of these data sets by flying over the city, literally in a plane, flying over the city, and capturing accurate 3D models of every single property. So if we look at this screen, you're going to see 2 pictures with 2 arrows. The first one, if you see the arrow pointing to a property, it seems like a small 1-level building. But actually, we were able to figure out a couple of years later by using this technology, look at the new building that was built there. So we were only taxing it based on the first one when actually it existed in the second picture. So we can actually see now where buildings are being built. And by combining this data with other data sets, we now have the most accurate and timely picture of construction in New York City. And in dollars, just year to date, the city has found an additional $24 million in revenue just from this new initiative. So once again, thank you to data. This project is still in the early phase, and we have many more data sets to process. But as we go further in this process, we expect our numbers to grow and grow dramatically. So I'd like to conclude with one final and fast data story, and it has to do with the city's efforts to combat climate change. Mayor de Blasio committed New York City as a whole to reducing its emissions to carbon neutral by 2050, and this will not in any way be an easy feat. But one thing city government can do to contribute directly is to cut emissions from our own vehicles in half, and that is what the mayor has asked us to do in just a few short years. Sure, it's easy to say, well, just take the vehicles off the road. Well, but we still have to provide services. You want your garbage picked up, right? You would like your sewer and water systems to work properly. We have 14,000 traffic signals that have to be maintained in the city every year. So the answer lies not in just taking cars off the road, but in driving less while accomplishing the same amount of work. And the way we're going to do that is, once again, by using data. We're installing data collection systems in every vehicle we own. The information that will glean from this will allow us to, one, use our vehicles more efficiently. So in March, when the mayor asked us to increase our vehicle utilization numbers, right now we only utilize vehicles 67% of the time. Because once we have these devices on the cars, we know when they start, we know where they're going, we know how far they're going, we know if they're out of service. So we said 67% is a pretty low number for a city of our size. So our goal is to increase that to 80%. And so this will allow us to, one, send vehicles out in the most efficient routes possible, allow for multiple employees to share the same vehicle, and to do a strategic job replacing gas vehicles with hybrid and electric vehicles. And we're also in the process of building out the infrastructure, especially for electric vehicles, to allow us to do more and more of that. We're not there yet, but we do estimate that as we go through this, city vehicles will drive 10 million fewer miles per year. We will burn 500,000 fewer gallons of gas a year. And that will mean the city of New York will decrease its annual emissions by 6,300 metric tons of CO2 gas a year. And that's basically the equivalent of leaving nearly 7 million pounds of coal a year in the ground. And that's where carbon belongs. So that's my story today. A couple of examples I wanted to show you, but clearly it's not all we're using data for. And I hope just these 3 examples give you a flavor of how we are using data to improve operations. But as technology continues to improve in the future, there will be opportunities to use data in ways that we cannot even imagine now, and that is very exciting for me. New York City is the most data-driven it has ever been, and we are only going to become more data-driven. So thank you for having me here today, and I hope as we continue to be big fans of data that we can keep this dialogue going. And I'm happy to take just a few questions if anyone has on these initiatives or any other initiatives that the city might be undertaking. No questions? Yes.
Microphone.
Oh, thank you. That was helpful.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How have you been able to bridge the data gap in between multiple departments?
That's a really good question and a really frustrating thing to do. So the one good thing that we've been doing is as we build, we have a lot of legacy systems. Let me start there, that we are moving away from server-based or land-based to hopefully go more cloud-based, and that's the goal. But the directive that I've given all the agencies as we build new systems, which we're building a new property tax system, which we talked about. We're building a new system for our Department of Buildings called DOB Now that will allow people to apply for building permits online versus going into an office. But the directive I've given is make sure you know your partners who use the data that is in that system. And you need to work with them so that you can integrate their workflow into your workflow. So I wish I could say widely we're doing it immediately, but I think we will get there during time, because basically as people build new systems, and we will need to build new systems, we're going to have to integrate this or I won't let the project move forward.
I have a question about rats.
One of my favorite topics, as you imagine.
As a New York City resident. And I've also been aware of many, many efforts to combat rats. And I know you said that rat complaints overall are down 7% since you started, but how do you know you're not just moving the rats to another location or pushing them out of your target areas?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think we're moving the rats, and let me tell you why. So that's a very interesting story, and I know I only have a few minutes left, but when you do rat mitigation, you basically, the old-fashioned way would be to, disturb the burrows, try to harass them, we call, but also do rodenticide, which is a poison, which was kind of hit and miss. So we decided to go a new route. A couple years ago, the city tried a pilot where they would use dry ice as a pesticide. So basically, a burrow has two ends to it, and you would plug one burrow, put dry ice in, and plug the other burrow. And it was so effective that the rats almost died immediately. They were asphyxiated. The EPA found out we were using dry ice as a pesticide and said, well, you can't do that. Dry ice is not a pesticide. So when I started looking at this program, that was a couple years ago, I said, well, why aren't we trying to pitch this again? So we pitched it to state DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, who helped us to go to the EPF, and we got approval for this new pesticide called rat ice within 3 months. But the manufacturer never expected that, so they couldn't even manufacture it fast enough. So we had to actually wait for it to be manufactured. So two things, because we're using that new technique, it is really capturing the rats a lot quicker. And other things that we're doing, especially when there's demolition or construction, we're now requiring that, baiting and everything be done all around. A lot of construction in these areas I'm talking about. So baiting has to be done all around so that when you disturb the sites and the rats start running away, they actually get caught up. So it's a trick, but that's also why we're doing it monthly. Because, obviously, if I saw it go from, 100 burrows to 0 in a month, something's probably not right there. The data may not be really accurate, but we've done this monthly for close to 2 years now. And we also watch the other areas of the city are not seeing substantial upticks in the adjoining areas. But it's a great question.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm curious to what degree, if any, financial and non-financial benchmarking plays a role in the New York City administration.
It does. And financial, do you mean by, outcomes meaning, revenues produced, or does it mean, if you're getting your rate of return on the dollars you're putting in?
All the above, anything from revenues per capita, spending per capita in different areas.
Sure.
And the outcome.
Of course, it's easier to do any new initiative if it generates revenues, right? So the city is in a very cautionary budget period right now. If you've read the papers, we've done some savings programs and asked the agencies to cut back. So I think what we're doing now as part of that process, and the mayor talked about it when he gave his budget address, is we're now looking at initiatives that we started, maybe 5 years ago at the beginning of the administration. And one, are they actually working? Because if you're going to put the dollars in there, especially without revenue, you better see some outcomes, right? Either public health, public safety, some public benefit. And if it's not working, either we might retweak it or basically maybe eliminate and put the dollars into a program that we can then hopefully will be successful. But we really do also strive to figure out how to make programs revenue generating, like the property tax system one that I showed. And we clearly, as I said, we've seen $24 million in additional revenue in just this year so far, so clearly we can track that. But it's a great question, and it's a really important thing that we do track, because if we're spending money on something, it better have a good outcome. Otherwise, it's just not working. But I think it's a great question.
Yeah, I'm curious in your initiative to use data, how you're using data to advance equity, and if you're including a diverse number of voices in the conversation about how to use data.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And as you know, the mayor really has a huge equity agenda and has made sure that we serve all areas and all people of the city. And I think even looking at what we did with the RAP program, so the areas that we chose, we didn't choose the Upper West Side or Midtown because these areas tend to be more low-income people, less healthy people, and therefore by putting additional rat mitigation, but we also for this program we're doing more trash removal, more pickup, more treatment in parks, because a lot of people in these areas, parks is the only thing they have to go to. And we don't want them sitting there and having, and I'm just going to use the rat example, and having, rats run across their baby carriages, which sometimes we saw before we doing this. So that's just one example. By doing these 3 areas, which are not high-income areas, we're going to hopefully be able to improve quality of life, but also health outcomes. I mean, if you all remember in the Grand Concourse, prior to the start of this program, we had a couple of cases of leptospirosis where I think there were 3 people who contracted the disease. 1 unfortunately died, the other 2 recovered. But that was really a big impetus for this, because this was a low-income area that this happened. And the mayor really said, we have to do something to help these people. And so across many different programs, it is clearly an eye we are taking. And the mayor is very focused on all boroughs and all parts of New York City, and definitely wants to make sure that there's equity across all the boroughs, but focusing on areas that we really need better health needs and sanitation and things such as that. We have one here. And I think it says I have 49 seconds left, so it's a very big timer up here, by the way, which is good because I don't have my glasses on, so.
Every agency shares this information, but there is no standardized way of collecting it and centralizing it and then analyzing it.
That's a great answer. That's one of the things we're doing with this property tax system that we put up there. Is it's no longer, it's interesting. What I find, and it's extremely very frustrating, is I'll talk to agencies who get data from another agency. I'm like, well, how do you get it? They're like, well, we do a data dump every night. And that just drives me crazy. I mean, you should be able to just, as we're trying to do live feeds into each one. But we're not going to get there, as I said, we're not going to get there overnight, but we're going to get there as we change systems. And I've also asked DO-IT, which is our Department of Information Technology, to really look at what agencies are on. Some agencies aren't even serviced by them. Some do their own servicing. So we have kind of a mishmash. So I would love to get more agencies centrally serviced by our Information Technology Center, and figure out how to use that to make sure we're using the same platforms and how we can transmit data safely, because that's another issue that we have to make sure as we're transmitting it. We don't want people just transmitting it over any method. And we've really been focusing on that and working with our Cyber Command office to figure out what are best practices. And going up, as we found, eventually moving things up into the cloud where we feel we have a strong confidence that there's much more security based around those. So these are just a couple of things that we're looking at. But it's a great point and something we struggle with every day. We do. I think we just announced what? Kelly Jean. So I think that position was vacant for a little while, but now we're happy to have someone in that position. I think it was just announced fairly recently. So hopefully we'll have some good input working with that office. So, all right, well, the timer says 0, so it's time for me to go. I do want to thank you all for having me here. I wish I could stay because it seems like a fascinating agenda from my conversations earlier this morning, but hopefully it will not be the last time we meet. So have a great day, everybody.